Now, let me give you a little bit of a secret. We recognize that when somebody has done absolutely everything in a sheer desperate attempt to make a CV look good, the unfortunate reality is every student is uh, preparing to get recruited and not really preparing to be a professional. And we can see that.
Usually associates maybe due to burnout, or they claim that there's no work life balance, or they pivot to litigation after a year or two. So what would your advice be for such an associate who's weighing in that decision?
What if there's a moot missing? If I have this entire year in my CV where I've not done a moot, that's it. I'm not going to get recruited. I think that panic needs to go. That's not the way we recruit. Why don't you do this, or why don't you not work? Why don't you just stay home? And I think that gave me a lot of fire in my belly to say that it cannot be like this.
Today we are answering three burning questions: what it takes to get shortlisted for a tier 1 law firm, what the legal world looks like inside these firms, and where the legal market is headed over the next few decades. To answer these questions, we have with us the brilliant Paridhi Adani, partner and head of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. She brings an unmatched perspective to the table, having dealt in billion-dollar deals. She knows what it takes to succeed in this profession. Let's get started. There is a myth about corporate law that it is actually what is shown in suits. So, if you can just demystify that myth and tell us that what does it really involve?
I would love to say that it's actually like what you see in suits. I wouldn't mind that. But unfortunately, the reality is a little bit far from what you see on TV. Um, I would like to believe we dress as well, but I'm not so sure. But on a serious note, I think the world of corporate law is a lot more about the intersection of business, finance, regulatory work, and the law itself. And of course, it requires a very different skill set from what you're traditionally exposed to when you see law school and when you look at other sort of traditional images of what a lawyer does when you're standing on your feet and arguing in court all day. So, I think we all imagine that we're all sitting behind a computer and drafting documents all day long. That's almost the other image that pops up in someone's mind when you think about what happens in a corporate career in a law firm. That's only partly true. I think what actually is not visible is the amount of time we deal with people, with processes, with systems, with regulators, with working as a team, and sort of jointly coming up with that one clause that goes into a document. So I don't know if that helps, but
With the advent of AI, things are really changing a lot, be with respect to work mandates or how even the newly joined associates are working in these firms. So, what do you think has really changed in law firms in terms of how the work is taking place?
I think if you had asked me this question yesterday, my answer would have been different. My answer today is different. The pace of change is actually that much that what I could do yesterday with the power of technology and other modern systems that have entered the workforce, and what I can do almost just 24 hours later is so different. And I think that's a very exciting and a very challenging part of the professional cycle right now. The pace of change has actually, of course, worked advantageously in some cases where a lot of things that were what we refer to as grunt work has kind of now gone away and that process has been automated. The challenge that we're facing is that that's also where people learned. Right? You looked at 5 contracts of the same type so that you could tell that the sixth contract was off. All of that has gone. And now we are trying more unconventional methods to teach judgment, to teach pattern spotting, to teach strategy, and to teach perspective to those same people who have to do the same thing but without the training. So I think that's one thing that we're seeing, that even though the output can come from a machine, the judgment isn't coming from anywhere. And our seniors are going to have to play a very different role.
If I look at this from a student's point of view, and if it were in your hand, what skills would you introduce in these legal education system so that students are more industry ready?
The reality is, and I'm fully conscious of where I'm speaking, but the reality is the syllabus and the implementation of the syllabus are two different things. Um, and I don't think that has changed from when I was in law school. I don't know if it is going to change by the time you're done. But I think there is a gap across every sector, that your institutions are not preparing you for the real world. We know that. So I think the partnership between industry and academia becomes more and more important when you realize that the syllabus is static to that extent. What I think students need to do to be more industry ready, and especially in a very tech forward environment, will be to build skills that are relevant to take your syllabus, to take your education, to take your experience, and bring it to the fore. So I think, of course, we talk about things like communication, problem solving, pattern recognition, etc. I think these are important. But what does that mean when you're actually in a workplace? It's how you present your ideas, it's how you work as a team, it's how you project manage. We look heavily at digital literacy. So I would definitely watch out for that student that has used technology not to do a, not to have a shortcut in life, but to actually be a better version of themselves, which would be an asset to any organization.
A student always starts with building their CV from the very first year itself, right? And from your point of view, what are some of the red flags in a CV that you'd uh, notice in the very first position while shortlisting them?
Now, let me give you a little bit of a secret. We recognize that when somebody has done absolutely everything in a sheer desperate attempt to make a CV look good. There'd be, sort of random, really short internships. There'd be 1,000 essays. There'll be a sudden burst of activity of moods. And um, as a recruiter, I think after seeing so many over the years, I think we are able to tell when somebody has been a little bit more intentional about what they're working towards, in terms of, here's what I want to do, and here's the firm that I want to get in, and here's what I see myself, at the end of 3 years or 5 years, as the case may be, versus I'm preparing for day zero. There is a very clear difference on that. And I think the unfortunate reality is every student is uh, preparing to get recruited and not really preparing to be a professional. And we can see that. So, as a recruiter, I would encourage that push yourself to be a better intern so that you're able to get callbacks. Push yourself to have some direction in terms of what you read, how you present that in that relevant work pool, so that maybe you can take on 2 or 3 assignments in a particular place. I think on your CV, we also look for how broad a person you are. We're not looking for, a bright star that's suddenly going to go up in flames because you've never spent time on yourself. I think the more hobbies you are, the more interesting you are as a person, the chances are more than one firm is going to try and recruit. Firstly, I think in order to be interesting, you're going to have to take away time from something else. And usually that means you're taking time away from something traditional. That's something that will stand out in a CV. I think people are afraid of that. That what if there's a moot missing? If I have this entire year in my CV where I've not done a moot, that's it. I'm not going to get recruited. I think that panic needs to go. That's not the way we recruit, and that's not what we're able to. That's not what we're hunting for when we look at a CV. When we look at a CV, we're also looking at saying, how have you spent the last 5 years? What have you done to yourself in furtherance of the profession, and whether you'll be able to sustain that as a skill set when you come into the workforce. I think we would definitely look out for candidates that have shown that depth. We look out for a lot of interesting other things, like what books you've read, what sports you played, do you have a hobby, I think we're all human beings at the end of the day, and we're all going to be colleagues. I think everybody wants to know that they're working with somebody who's beyond a piece of paper.
Ma'am, let's say that a student has interned with that particular team and then he or she really likes that team as well. But at what point during their internship do you feel that that particular intern has a PPO potential?
So I think we come to know fairly early on, despite how we may make you all feel. I think the signs are apparent more from the beginning. And I'm giving you a lot of secrets today, I realize that. But I think let me give you another one, that it's very unlikely that you're going to point at somebody and say, oh my God, that person knew everything, every section, have to give a PPO. Or, you know, he got everything perfectly formatted, must give a PPO. So I think when interns are here, they are trying so hard to be perfect. And they're trying so hard to have this definition of themselves that looks PPO ready, that firstly always backfires. But that's not what we're looking for. We go a little bit beyond that. You are looking for somebody who can sustain be part of your team, work with you 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down the line. You're looking for somebody like that who shows genuine curiosity, who understands communication, who understands to own up when something is wrong. And there have been interns that, have come up and said, I think we didn't do this right. We would welcome the opportunity to do this again, or I apologize for whatever impacted. And that integrity stands out. Whereas somebody who's trying to be perfect will probably take a different approach to a situation like this. So, frankly, I think we assess people um, very differently. You're assessing the kind of person, the kind of behaviors they model, and not really looking for perfect answers. The technical excellence is important, but that's not what lands you the PPO.
Many of our listeners don't come from tier one universities, and a lot of firms really don't hire in these firms as well. But there are a plethora of students who want to build their career in corporate who come from those institutions. So, my next question is particularly addressing their concern as to how can they bridge that gap, or what skill set do they need in order to get shortlisted for tier one firms?
I'm grateful that you all are bringing up a topic like this. I think firms have a limited number of days and a limited number of seats that they will fill. And they will sort of move in certain directions where, they would engage with certain institutions. That does not mean that these institutions are the ones that are producing the best lawyers. We recognize that there is talent everywhere, and we are open to engaging with that talent and recruiting that talent. Now, what does that mean when we go to these institutions? Firstly, I think most of the time these we see that students themselves are reaching out to us, and we don't say no just because you're not from a particular college. So the fact that somebody aspires to have a career in a tier 1 firm and does not treat their name of their institution as something that should define where they work, I think that's a fantastic sort of starting point. And I think, frankly, for us, as a firm, we are looking more about the kind of professional you can become. So we look at the same things. Have you invested your time properly in sort of research, building skills, building, literacy and other aspects related to the law? A number of these universities actually offer multidisciplinary programs. So those aspects also stand out. Uh, Whether they have used their time well, whether they are able to communicate clearly, and whether they have the hunger and the ambition to actually do what it takes to come and work in a firm like us. I think that's all we're looking for, and you can tell.
I feel that students often worry about getting into these firms like hard in the first place, but we don't talk enough about what happens once you enter these firms. And therefore, we often see that usually associates, maybe due to burnout, or they claim that there's no work life balance, or they pivot to litigation after a year or two. So, what would your advice be for such an associate who's weighing in that decision?
Firstly, I think if somebody is pivoting into a different practice area, my theory would be is that that has very little to do with burnout and has a lot to do with the fact that you boxed yourself into something that you don't think you can do for the rest of your life. That's part of it is burnout because you've then understood and appreciated that you don't see yourself doing this for the next 20, 30 years. But um, there's nothing wrong with that. And if it means that you're able to have a healthier version of yourself and a more sustainable version of your career by moving into practice areas or different platforms, there's nothing wrong with it. And there's absolutely, it's accepted. I think burnout happens on two, three fronts. I won't shy away from the fact that the profession is demanding. It's a high risk, high reward environment where it expects you to bring the best version of yourself to the workplace every day. At the end of the day, we're all human, so we do recognize that that's not possible and we have to be kinder to each other. But the reality is that we are dealing with stakeholders that don't always pardon us for not being that best version on a particular day. The work environment is demanding, and there's almost a domino effect that if I don't do my job well, somebody else is going to be affected, etc. And that creates a certain kind of pressure ecosystem, especially I think in the first couple of years. And then, of course, there are pockets in which it gets harder, easier, harder, easier. So I think in the first couple of years, I don't think enough has been said about what you need to do. It's not just about the hours or it's not just about the complexity of the work. But, a lot of gaps actually come in because you are put in an environment where you're stressed out about how to speak to your senior. So you're carrying that pressure on yourself. You carry that pressure about drafting a perfect email, and that probably gives you a little bit of a sleepless night as well. You and I spoke a little bit on the side about the amount of caffeine and sugar that goes into, sort of having a corporate career as well. So that, of course, takes a toll on your mind and body. But we as a profession need to do better for sure in terms of telling people what it takes in the first 2 years to stay in the profession. It's not just about the hours, it's not just about being a yes man, it is not just about getting a perfectly, sort of formatted document. It's about focusing on accuracy, it's focusing on, presentation skills, it's focusing on integrity and work ethic. Your colleagues will probably give you more sort of uh, freedom and able to adjust better in an environment if you show what it takes to function well in a high pressure environment.
What mindset do young lawyers need in order for a long and sustainable legal career in the corporate world?
The law, the way it is, and the legal career is one that requires patience. It's not one of those careers that we see where it's you have 5 or 6 years to make your mark. It's a long tenure. And what you generally see in the first 5 years of your career are rarely what you will see towards the middle or the end of your career. That's misunderstood. And we spend so much time focusing on just that we forget to build what it takes to have a long career in this profession. For me, what I feel, a lot of people around me, and I think it still exists in the profession, that there is a lot of bias in people's mind on what a successful legal career looks like, where you make it, and what making it looks like. All of that needs to go. If you ask me what success is going to look like in 2035 for you, I won't be able to define it. And I don't think you should try very hard to define it either. Firstly, reflect on it at a point in time. Maybe in law school, it's about certain things. When you get a job, it's about certain things. 5 years into your profession, success is defined very differently. And definitely 15, 20 years down the line, it is sort of defined very differently. This mindset of a point in time thinking versus a long term thinking definitely something that needs to change in the profession. Secondly, I think it's okay to not have a traditional route. to the up. We believe the career is linear. We believe there is only one path to make it, and that's not true at all. And we shut out so many opportunities along the way because we've thought this is what it takes. That if I don't land up in Bombay within a month of me graduating, or if I haven't secured this job, means that there is that I'm a failure, or these 5 years of my law school were wasted. It's not the truth.
And ma'am, you said that you wanted to do litigation early on. So what's that one piece of advice for like students out there who still want to pursue litigation?
You're not going to like my answer. I think everybody must do a little bit of litigation. Um, I think today one of the things that we miss is that everybody kind of boxes themselves into a path um, very early, and it's almost binary that I can do corporate, I can't do litigation, or I can do litigation, I can't do corporate, etc., etc. I think because I had managed to get some exposure in litigation, that I firstly enjoyed my corporate work a lot more. And a lot of what I do now actually blends a lot of that. You think a lot about how courts are going to interpret something, you think about enforcement, you think a lot more about is this something that sits in a particular framework? Is it going in the right direction from the country's perspective? So, my advice to people who are thinking in binary terms, please don't. As far as possible, try to get a little bit of experience in either of the fields. It will shape you to be a better lawyer. Sure, you may build your career in a particular way, but if you've closed your mind to what that work is, you're not going to, you're not going to be able to really experience the full set of lawyering that comes with the work that we do.
You've really demystified the myths that revolve around corporate world. And we've also looked at where the market is headed. So now if we look back at your personal journey, I'd like to ask the last question. You come from a legacy background in law, but who were the people who really helped you navigate this world?
I think there were a lot of people that stood by me. My parents in particular, because you need to know that somewhere somebody has your back. And I think there were a lot of people, including them, who did that for me. Equally, I think I'm a very stubborn person. So the more I heard no, I think the more I realized that this has to change. Why don't you do this? Or why don't you do this? Or why don't you not work? Why don't you just stay home? And I think honestly, that gave me a lot of fire in my belly to say that it cannot be like this. So I think I would say that I was shaped very much by not only people who told me it's okay, go ahead, try, and also by people who said, don't bother trying, this is how it's always going to be.
Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us today, ma'am. From the entire episode, there's one thing that will always remain with me is that humans are always a museum of the experience that they face throughout their journey. Our listeners definitely now have a clear roadmap for the exciting journey that lies ahead for them. And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for thinking of me.